Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Ukrainian, and in this one there are numerous Russian advances. Specifically, there is a number around Chasiv Yar and Toretsk in the direction of Kostiantynivka from the south, southeast and northeast. The Russians also managed to advance to the east of Pokrovsk as they continue storming the Ukrainian defensive line east of the city. The Russians also continued advances in the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region and within Kamyansk in the western outskirts of the Zaporizhzhia region. Starting out in the Chasiv Yar direction, the Russians continued advances, capturing the entirety of the town of Mykolaiivka and encircling the Ukrainian grouping of forces within the first patch area near Chasiv Yar. The Russians are here looking to gain full control over the first patch area with the operational encirclement. They are one step closer to that, which only leaves the southern residential area remaining under Ukrainian control of Chasiv Yar. With this, the Russians have started the offensive operation to advance beyond that of Chasiv Yar. This indicates that following the capture of the apartment complex area, they have not gathered a large enough group to launch these offensive operations. We'll see the main targets of the Russians will be to gain control of the remaining parts of Chasiv Yar and then proceed onwards towards Maiske and Markove on the northern flank, towards Stinky and Chervone in the western flank, and Peretyene in the southern flank, following which the Russians would be in a position where they practically have an operational encirclement of the northern and western flank of Kostiantynivka, leaving just a few off-roads in the southwest remaining under Ukrainian control without Russian fire control of them, which the Russians are fighting over in the direction of Stepanivka, Dovhabelka and Roshkishne, which will cut off the southern flank, and Mykolaiivka will allow Russians to have double fire control over the road here west of Kostiantynivka from the southwestern and northern directions. The Russians are here continuing offensive operations in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar to expand their zone of control for the operational encirclement of Kostiantynivka, and also to pressure the Ukrainian forces to the south of the city to connect with their forces north of Toretsk. In connection with this, the Russians continued offensive operations north of Dnipropetrovsk following the capture of the town, where they're now fighting over the fortified positions of the Ukrainians near Bilaora, getting control over a wide area of these fortifications they previously had control of, but the Ukrainians counterattacked and retook control of them. With this, Russians have yet again regained control of these positions, and they continued offensive operations in the northern direction to connect with the forces near Chasiv Yar, which is now just a few kilometers away. Following the capture of Bilaora, there is the defensive line of the Ukrainians. However, their positions along the canal have been weakened from many months of shelling, and if they lose Bilaora, they will lose their last logistical hub for these forward positions, following which the Russians will gain control of them ahead of the defensive line, connecting the two sides, and the Russians will be able to strengthen their offensive operations in the southeastern and northeastern flanks of Kostiantynivka. The Russians also continue their offensive operations west of Toretsk, where they are fighting over the industrial area from the eastern and southern direction. The Russians are fighting over the southern outskirts, trying to establish themselves and gain a foothold within the industrial area, while also attempting to clear it from the Ukrainian forces. The Russians have combined these offensive operations with a push from the east, getting control over the first lines in the area, physically cutting off the road into the industrial area from the north and allowing the Russian forces to start pressuring the industrial zone from the eastern direction as well, not just cutting off their main supply line, but also physically moving in to storm it from multiple directions. The Russians continued offensive operations to secure the western flank of Toretsk and continue the operational encirclement of the Ukrainian grouping from Klebenvik in the north to Shcherbenivka in the south. Moving on to the east of Pokrovsk, the Russians continue significant advances to the south of Mirne. They managed to gain control over additional first lines, where they're pushing in the direction of Mykolaiivka from the Mirne direction, widening the front line for their push in the direction of Novoekonomishne. The Ukrainians have some fortified positions in this section of the front line to prevent the Russians storming these towns directly head-on. However, the Russians are doing a wide push, bypassing the fortified positions from the north and the south, while storming them head-on, spreading out the Ukrainian forces and the concentration of Ukrainian fire to different directions. At the same time, the Russians secured the northern flank of Myrny, getting control over the forest lines in the area and moved along these forest lines to pass across the Dragon Teeth and anti-tank ditches, to which the Russians started storming Rasina. That was yesterday, and today they managed to gain control over the town, fighting over the fortified positions on the western flank of it. The Russians are here storming the defensive line head on and starting to puncture some positions within it. The Russians are here attempting to break through the Ukrainian defensive line, establish themselves along the river line from Myrolyobivka in the south and all the way towards the north, cut off the road between Pokrovsk and Drushkivka in the northeast, and to gain an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian supply line to the north of the city to start the operational encirclement of Pokrovsk. So we're seeing on the northeastern flank, both in the direction of Kostiantynivka and in the direction of Pokrovsk, the Russians are getting very, very close to the operational encirclement of both cities. With their push in the northern direction, the Russians have managed to pass through the anti-tank ditches and the Dragon Teeth in multiple directions. This opens up the road towards Toretsk from the southern direction and in the direction of Boykivka to the north, as well as Novoekonomishne to the south. The Russians are here establishing a bridgehead across along the fortified positions to start storming Novoekonomishne from the north. Combined with assaults from the east towards Mykolaiivka, the Russians are here looking to gain control over Mykolaiivka and then storming Novoekonomishne from the north and the east, establishing themselves along the river line to start pressuring Myrnorod from the east. Combined with the recent advance of Myrnorod to the south, the Russians may look to storm it from the eastern, southern, and northern flanks for a combined strike from 3 separate directions during the operational encirclement of Pokrovsk. In the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region, the Russians continue to advance within the Dnipropetrovsk region, where they are looking to encircle the Ukrainian forces remaining within the southwestern outskirts by connecting their eastern flank near Horehove with the southern flank near Dashne. At the same time, they're looking to storm the fortified positions of the Ukrainians here south of Novopavlivka to open the road towards the town from the southern flank and the eastern flank. At the same time, pressure increases on Moravka to the northeast, where the Russians are heavily bombarding the town ahead of them, planning on storming it to then open up the road towards Novopavlivka from the northeast. The objective of the Russians to gain control over it and adjust it as a logistical supply hub for future offensive operations into the Dnipropetrovsk region to flank the defensive lines of the Ukrainians in the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. The Russians also advanced to the southwest of that in the direction of Pidopne, where they managed to secure the highway north of Komar across the river line, securing the foothold within Pidopne and continuing the battle over the town. At the same time, the first advance towards Mirne are also taking place, where the Russians are looking to establish their foothold across the Mokryali river line by getting control of Pidopne and Mirne, combined with the control over Fedorivka and Vesele and Shevchenko, to push in the direction of Voskresenka and the remaining parts of the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region. In the Zaporizhzhia region, the Russians continued advances within Kamyansk, gaining control over additional parts of the southern streets of the town. Russians are here looking to gain full control over the crossings across the river line, continued offensive operations along the Dacha areas along the Dnieper River, and to fully secure the town of Kamyansk for future offensive operations along the river line in the direction of Zaporizhzhia city, establishing themselves south of these defensive lines for future offensive operations beyond it. In other news that are very, very difficult for Ukraine, Pentagon is halting on some of the ammunition it had pledged to Ukraine, including PAC-3 Patriot interceptors, 155mm artillery shells, GMLRS rockets, Stingers, AIM-7 missiles, and Hellfire missiles. Most of these have been used within the Iranian-Israeli conflict, while some have simply been sent to Ukraine in large numbers. These halting is due to concerns that the US arms stocks are dwindling, and this means that the Ukrainians will face a significant shortage in air defense missiles. They're already facing such difficulties because the US had already slowed down the delivery of such ammunition. Now that they are halting them completely, the Ukrainians may run out. If the Ukrainians do not have necessary ammunition for their Patriot systems and AIM-7 systems, then Russian airstrikes, the cruise missile strikes, and the drone strikes will be much more effective, and the Russians may achieve air supremacy in some sections of the front line, which will make it very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to hold some of their frontline positions. Therefore, the situation for Ukraine is becoming more and more difficult, with the US decreasing support for Ukraine and the Russians upscaling their offensive operations. Complete air supremacy over sections of the front line will allow the Russians to launch their summer offensive much more effectively, and this increases the risk of a Ukrainian frontline collapse, whether locally or throughout the country. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.